Hi everyone, and welcome to the Hub Unspoken Special, a 6-part series where we have curated some of the awesome discussions we've had over the last 100 episodes. As data and analytics is really in its infancy, and so many people are trying to find their way still, we've always aimed to create a platform for us and our guests to open up and share real-life stories about delivering value from data, have frank and honest discussion about what works and what doesn't, and represent what we at Cynozure and the CDO Hub see as vital topics for organisations to engage in. So this special series celebrates and showcases those discussions, the amazing guests we've had, and the brilliant content we've shared. Each of the 6 episodes in this series focuses on a specific topic: data strategy or data management, business value, data platforms, data leadership, and finally, leading with purpose. It was incredibly hard to decide what to include from previous episodes, as there's been so many amazing things said by so many people. We hope, though, that we've represented this topic well and that it resonates with you all. This is part 6 of the series, creating a better, more purpose-led and resilient future. This episode is focused around our purpose as a business of creating a better future for all through the open and positive use of data. This requires us to change and be the change we want to see. We look back at the conversations we've had with brilliant leaders and uncover the use of data for the good of society and a more sustainable future. We explore how leaders and their teams can become more resilient, diverse, and build a more human-centered world, and look at topics that align to our values as a business of being authentic, being brave, being a crew, being data, and being focused. First up was a conversation I had back in episode 12 with Joanna Cruz, the brilliant and inspirational leader who focuses on enabling young people to thrive in the workplace of the future. She is a former teacher of politics and economics, and more recently the co-founder and leader at a number of startups who are passionate about how entrepreneurship can be used as a powerful tool for social change. We had a brilliant discussion about the need to be human-centered in a world of technology and AI, the impact technology can have on our mental health, and the need for empathy in building the future. Take a listen. There's a bit of a hype about data analytics and AI, but there's also a lot of reality about it being here. It's now, and it's quite easy to sort of get caught up in this idea that machines will take over. Yeah. But the thing we wanted to talk about today is how we can't forget that in this world where there will be automation, there will be a deluge of data that can be used to drive improved services and solve really big problems in the world, and for companies and organizations and social enterprises and everyone, that we can't forget about this sort of human side of the equation and why that's really important to be human-centered in the way we design services, the way we design products that have got data analytics embedded into them.
It's really interesting because I think the way that this conversation is unfolding within the education sector at the moment is in some ways a great metaphor for the broader conversation about the role of technology in our lives. So on the one hand, there is a conversation quite rightly among education professionals and in this kind of broader sector around the potential negative implications of technology on young people, on mental health and well-being, etc. And I think, there is an interesting representation of this conversation around where has tech not been human-centered, or where do we need to kind of realign our focus to make sure that we are thinking about the end user in the work that we're doing. On the other hand, there is another much more positive conversation happening in education at the moment around the value that AI and data and machine learning can bring to the education experience. So Sir Anthony Seldon, for example, who's a very respected voice in this space, has just released a book called The Fourth Education Revolution, and that's about the role the artificial intelligence could play in education. And there are some very interesting discussions happening there about, will it enable education institutions, companies, teachers to individualize learning in a much more meaningful way? So it's funny because in some ways the education sector is embodying this dichotomy that we see in this conversation around there are lots of concerns about how data and technology could potentially not be human-centered, But then on the other hand, there are a whole lot of conversations around the huge benefits of that. For me, the essence of the conversation is really around one of empathy and of organizations that work in this space, making sure that due consideration is given in a kind of very human, empathetic way to the lived experience of the users who use their technology, and for that to be an iterative and ongoing conversation. And that requires a discipline. It requires organizations constantly coming back to, are we making the right decision here? How do we balance human considerations versus commercial considerations, etc.? But for me, a lot of this is about having the discipline as an organization to come back to the humans who are ultimately the end users and the recipients and hopefully the beneficiaries of the work that we do. When we look at young people and the impact of technology on their day-to-day well-being, on their ability to engage with their peers, on the implications for peer pressure, etc. And there are some significant implications also from a kind of identity perspective in terms of data being misused, and people not being informed about what's been happening with their data. So there is a kind of spectrum of potential negative implications. But I suppose, with great power comes great responsibility. And, organizations are in an incredibly privileged position now, as many of them gather huge amounts of data, and hopefully those organizations will be compelled to use that data in a way which is mindful of the humans that those numbers represent. I think the other aspect of this conversation, which is really interesting, is that because of the scandals at Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, etc., I do feel that at an individual level, people are taking much more active ownership over this. So, it's really interesting to see the conversations that are now happening around dinner tables about how people are using their data, how they're protecting their own data. And I think a lot of this conversation is really around conscious use, both in terms of companies' conscious use of its users' data, but also as individuals, we have a responsibility to ensure that we are conscious in the kind of data we put out there. So I think it's a very healthy conversation in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and you touched on it there, but I think there's a role to play across the spectrum. There's sort of bang in your space, or sort of education and school and early life to make sure that, and I want to come on to this a bit more, but that the right things are being taught and the right skills are being given. There's a role for organizations to build and design products that are human-centered, that put people at the heart of what it is, and don't forget about that. And build experiences that add value and ensure well-being and that sort of stuff. There's probably a role for government in this as well, to make sure that the bots don't take over, quite frankly, and that we continue to design the world, the economy, the world around us in a way that puts us humans at the front of it. Next up is my discussion with PA, the head of Insight and Innovation at the London Borough Council, Barking and Dagenham. We explored his role in using data for societal gain by benefiting and positively impacting citizens. In my mind, the ultimate use case for data and creating a better future. His approach to engaging with residents to ensure data is used in ways that are open, transparent, and returning value is one we can all learn from.
Several of my colleagues across the local government family have often asked, what does your data strategy look like, and what does your digital strategy look like? And the reality of the matter is, those are important products, but they can't sit outside of the purpose of local government in the first place. So how I quite often answer that is, if you look at our place shaping strategies, if you look at our inclusive economy strategies, if you look at our care and support, social care, participation with residents, those are key strategies and policies as part of the makeup of any local authority. Yeah. And if you were to read them, you would hopefully see a bit of my voice and my team's voice actually embedded within those strategies. So that's what I personally believe that's what data leadership in local government means. It's not about, or not just about, what does your tech architecture looks like. It's actually about, well, is a social worker enabled enough to make the best informed decisions that they can when they're looking after a vulnerable person, by bringing together data and insight that will help them in their professional judgment, not a substitute for their professional judgment. And it also means that across the population, are we even using data in the right way to measure the things that really matter to our residents? So I think where my mandate comes in 4 years ago was a brilliant piece of work done across the authority with residents in building our Borough Manifesto, and that was an engagement with thousands of residents about, what would they like to see in the borough? What do they like about it? What do they not like about it? How can the authority and its partners make life better for many people? And that exercise and the data that we gathered through that exercise actually enabled us to design plans of action and particular use cases that we felt as people working in this space gave us more motivation, because it was resident defined and resident led, and tackling some very complex things, multi-structural things that might not just be within the gift of a local authority either. So that certainly gave us a lot more energy and enthusiasm. And the last thing I think I'd say is that there's a reason why my job title is Head of Insight and Innovation and not Head of Data, because I believe that data is part of the formula that enables better outcomes and insight and innovation. It's not the only component of enabling that, and hence why my team is made up of more than data scientists.
Yeah, that's I think that's a good and important point. I think the word data does have connotations, as to be fair, does the word insight and innovation.
Yes, it does. Indeed,
but I know that the principle of what you're saying is that, and link back to kind of the role of data within local government, this is about attaching yourself to the things that really matter within. For residents and citizens, actually, and the things that matter to residents and citizens should matter to you as a local council.
Yes.
And if they matter to the local council, then they should matter to you as an insight, innovation, and data team.
Absolutely.
I think that sort of like, I don't know if this phrase is used in local council anymore, but golden thread from kind of like measures to the initiatives and actions that you take. But that kind of link from what the residents say, which is ultimately your customer, to the work that you do, attaching those things together is really important, though. How important is the interaction or collaboration, or just sort of handshake with your neighbouring boroughs? Does that, because obviously as a resident, people tend to know what borough they're in, but sometimes you can sort of be on, one side of the street and the other side of the street in different boroughs. How important from the way you operate and sharing and collaborating across the different London councils or outside of London, do you, A, is in the sort of psyche, and B, practically speaking, happens sort of in terms of collaboration?
I think the collaboration has been more enforced by the pandemic, actually. So our collaborative efforts around East London, but particularly because when you look at the health system, it's tiered across multiple geographies. So there isn't a health system only for Barking and Dagenham. It covers Barking, Dagenham, Havering, and Redbridge. So actually, when we work with a particular tier and of particular data. So, for example, there's there's a lot of talk, I mean, a lot of talk for probably at least a decade now about health and social care integration, and fundamentally that is about the fact that some of those customers are the same individuals seen by the NHS and seen by the local authority, and so one of the things that we did a couple of years ago was, well, what happens if we were to actually combine that data across multiple geographies? And what does that present us with? And because we were slightly on the front foot about that in the pre-pandemic world, I think that in itself has actually helped us with our response, because we had an integrated data set which covers the East London geography, and it gives us more opportunity to talk to Redbridge, Havering, and across the clinical commissioning group about the type of residents that we all see. You might be a resident of Barking and Dagenham, but you actually go to hospital in Redbridge or Havering, and that's I think there's more of an impetus on us all to make sure that in the post-pandemic world that continues, because actually it's proven that it's a good thing, and by looking at the data across multiple tiers and geographies, it's enabled all of us to have a good response.
As one of the fastest growing sectors, the data industry is seriously lagging behind across many diversity and inclusion metrics. This is not only impactful to individuals, but leaves organizations hit by a smaller talent pool that prevents them from creating high-performing teams, which in turn impacts on their ability to deliver value, innovate, and create successful outcomes. This next clip is from a great panel discussion focused on the topic of creating a more diverse workforce, ethical decision-making in recruitment, the need for influential role models, and creating a culture of openness and inclusivity.
Role models are so important, and I'm sure that Alison and Michelle both agree with that. We, in the data industry, we have very few visible female role models, and we know that this is a very important factor for women progressing in their careers. To see like-minded people that they can relate to as their inspiration and their role model, it's absolutely imperative.
Absolutely. And I think, again, if I think about it, sort of operating at the more senior level, when I'm looking at organizations, whether I'm going in as a consulting role or in conversations around a permanent position, one of the things that's really important to me is looking at what the leadership teams, what the executive teams look like. Are there any women outside of HR and marketing that have a seat at the table or not? Because that is a signal to me as to, if I am brought in a senior role, how are there going to be additional barriers to success beyond the ordinary business challenges? If I'm also fighting a culture that's not used to having strong women operating with P&L responsibility or contributing significantly to the strategy of a business outside of the functions of HR and marketing. And so that's something that, as well, it's not just within data around women and leadership, but also as part of the broader business context, because most roles in data and analytics are not within data companies. No, it's a functional area within a wider organization.
I think that's important, isn't it? Because there's a danger that you have the sales pitch for the role and the positions right. You sort of present this great image about what the organization is like, but unless the culture is also supportive of that, of what you say in that, it can't be a sales pitch. It needs to be true. It needs to be reflected. It needs to be provable and as you say, Rasheen, role modeled in the organization. It can't just be saying, on when you're on the search, on the hunt for people, we're talking very heavily there on recruitment. But as you say, someone arrives in a role and then there's their career in that company. So the culture needs to be such that supports the progression of a diverse and inclusive environment.
Which absolutely brings on to the point of retention, and something that we're seeing. It's a huge challenge for data generally. It doesn't matter gender or what diverse sector we're looking at here. Retention of good skills in data is at an all-time high of challenge. I mean, it's difficult whether you're Facebook or Google, it's difficult full stop to retain great talent. But unless your culture is right, you have got a fundamental flaw in your retention plan of staff. So I think it needs to be textbook 101 in the plan for whether that's, you know, line management in data, or it's from the HR or D&I team. Culture has to be at the top of the list.
Capturing data around what behavior has existed historically, or what people are doing now, is that those behaviors are still informed by biases and the discrimination that exists within society. So if you look at a case where Google was returning different search results when it came to searches for high paid jobs, whether it was a woman searching or a man searching, the men saw more results. That was a reflection of the fact that there are more men in high paid roles. So that's, factually that's correct. But from an ethical standpoint, all that does is serve to reinforce the trust within society and perpetuate those differences. And I think, there needs to be, within the data community, we need to ask ourselves, what role should we play in sort of reporting the facts? I say facts, they are the facts as presented by a society which is inherently unequal, versus do we have an ethical obligation to, in our sampling of our data sets, of our training data sets, etc., to bias towards a more equal society? I don't have an answer to that, but I think that's something that certainly needs to be discussed.
Oh no, I think that's a big one. That's the as you say, you can't ignore the facts that happen, but it doesn't mean you have to listen and judge what you do next based on those facts, I think is your point. And if we can recognize that in things like algorithm development and model development, and before we make, put them mainstream, if you like, we make sure that they're, as much of that bias is removed. But if we continually spot that some of that bias is happening, then, you tweak and train and adjust the model in the first place.
But with that, then there's also the business challenge. So let's say that men and women were shown the same number of high-paying jobs, but because they were not differentiated, the actual response rate is a bit lower because of the inherent, societal discrimination that exists. So business performance might take a bit of a hit by taking this particular ethical standpoint. There may be some businesses, and I think particularly those around the sort of more the social enterprise side of things, that are not only seeking to maximize return on value for shareholders, but also looking to have a positive impact on society. They may take a different view than an organization that's sole metric is financial.
But at least we're able to use the data that we get back. I mean, that's there's the full circle, isn't it? So we build algorithms, we build things that produce results that show biases or don't show biases, that get responses or don't get responses. We can learn from that, and so the sort of the where we can use our craft here is to use the data, use the outcomes, use the insight to continually improve. And Rasheen's already pointed out that this isn't 12-month job to sort of sort diversity. It's going to take time, and these are some of the mechanisms we can use, right?
Yeah. Well, and you've raised a good point there, that we're going to continue to learn with what the responses are. And so you could actually potentially put in place tracking to see whether the algorithms that you're developing and the responses that you're getting back are reinforcing inequality or actually helping to remove some of that inequality.
The ultimate aim of doing data is to deliver value. Creating a better, more purpose-led future requires us all to focus on outcomes that truly improve the way we work, our world, and our society. Back in episode 11, I spoke with Stephen Jameson and Maggie Buggy, both inspiring leaders at SAP, who are investing their energy and time in supporting their customers and partners on use cases that improve sustainability, improving the world around us, and on purpose-driven opportunities.
One interesting one we're doing with in the Nordics actually is around rainforests. So we've got working with one of the telco providers there, where we are plotting mobile phones effectively into trees in certain rainforest regions. It's effectively an IoT network providing huge amounts of stream data. What that's doing is when there's a sound of a chainsaw happening in a particular conservation area, then that sets an alert which then sends a real-time message to a control center, and they're able to go and then take intervention.
Oh, fantastic.
In the chainsaw. So actually helping to improve conservation of the rainforests.
So helping to more easily police the activity that you don't want to happen within the rainforest to sustain them.
Yeah. We also have one within our Ariba group around like trafficking of people and like slave trade and addressing that, which is on our website, actually, the full story about that. And also about even more near-term, less exciting things such as counterfeited drugs and using blockchain technologies to eliminate those. So although not one of the most headline-grabbing topics, like it has huge implications on the treatment of health when people in certain markets where these counterfeit drugs are being sold are experiencing worse patient outcomes because they're essentially taking placebos or counterfeit drugs. So the role of, say, blockchain within addressing pharma packaging and identifying counterfeit, we've thousands of use cases around them, to be honest.
And so what can data and analytics teams do today? So there's sort of big challenges around sustainability, long-term plays. What can people be doing right here, right now?
So for me, it's really simple. And then I'm sure Stephen will have a view like specific as well. But data and analytics teams need to always think about how does it apply. If I had £1 for every time either one of my teams around the world come to me with a brilliant idea that is just achieved through data and analytics, and I'm like, that's a wonderful idea, but how does that apply to either a business problem or a business opportunity? So my top recommendation to any specialist in this space is how does it apply? That's the killer question. And then frame your whole work around the application of it to drive the outcome.
And I think to add to that, and on a different dimension, I'd say, think big and collaborate. One of the things that I found extraordinary about the plastic challenge was organizations generally in the world are becoming much more aware of the importance of being purpose driven. And I think that's coming together with the fact that lots of organizations are now just really wanting to do the right thing, genuinely. And I was surprised by the sheer network of people out there that were inspired to do something about single-use plastics.
Yeah, you got a good group of people together. That doesn't just happen.
Exactly. And what was interesting is it wasn't that those organizations were there because they saw a commercial interest for themselves. They just genuinely wanted to solve it. They genuinely wanted to get on the bus and do something. And I think there is an appetite out there that can be tapped into where there are a lot of people keen to and motivated to do some good things, and they see the power of business and the ability of that to actually create a transformational change. Whether or not it's got direct commercial relevance, think big and collaborate, and I think that can really help drive some impact.
In this final part, we turn our attention to resilience. As individuals, contributors, managers, and leaders, resilience plays a huge impact on our ability to cope with life. Hosting a discussion with three brilliant people, Chief Data Officer Caroline Bellamy, psychology expert Christian Hughes, and ex-professional rugby player turned culture and change specialist Will Fraser, I explored the different perspectives of resilience and how you can create a resilient self and a resilient team. The conversation was recorded during the COVID-19 lockdown, so it was so relevant then, but continues to be so now.
I think it's really important also in a leadership position to have an authenticity of, we're not automatons. We are also humans. And I think that also gives permission to an environment which is really diverse, that you can allow others to also be human. Because if you represent this, I'm formidable, nothing bothers me, I'm a man mountain, woman mountain, whatever it is, then that's false. I think we've all seen, some people fall from grace, if you like, if that's this wrong phrase, but have tumbles in our lives. We've all tumbled. And there's an interesting moment, isn't it? And I'd be interested, Christian, in your views, where I've certainly gone through experiences in my life where I it's sort of mid-career, I think, where I was trying to be all kind of, I can and I can lead and I can do, and you're therefore constantly wearing this mask of impenetrable, utter control, can do the hours, can do the whatever. Yes, I can do my sports as well. And, I'm fighting on all fronts and I'm a mega woman. And then actually something trips you, whatever it is, something trips you. Maybe you don't perform in a meeting or a personal situation or an illness. and the mask comes down, and then the longer you try and keep the mask up, when actually you're flagging behind the mask, actually the worst results I've had, I've only had one, and I didn't burn, but came close to it. But it was because I was putting effort into maintaining a mask instead of earlier reaching out to my safe space and saying, hey, I'm having a moment or a period or a life choice. Can you give me some cover for a little bit? And I think that was something that's really important.
Really interesting, actually, the benefits of doing that from a team cohesion point of view anyway. So the second you kind of open yourself up and show a bit of vulnerability, immediately the level of trust goes up in the group. And it's this weird thing where you're right, from a leadership point of view, a lot of people think I need to wear this all on my shoulders. I need to deal with this all because I need to set the example. But actually, in opening up and saying, I'm really struggling with this, or actually can someone help me with that, what that does is immediately open that relationship and that connection, which builds trust, which means as a group, your kind of level of resilience immediately improves, even without actually having to deal with any kind of adversity. So yeah, I mean, it's one of these things that's very easy to sit here on a webinar and talk about, but actually to do it is a whole different kettle of fish.
Yeah, I can completely relate to that. I mean, I've been in scenarios where the sort of theory goes out the window because emotions have got high. I can think of, and back to a point, I can't remember who was making it, whether it was you, Caroline, or William. I can think of a scenario with England rugby where Stuart Lancaster was the boss of the 2015 World Cup, and there was a lot of sniping, a lot of that kind of wanting to look heroic in front of each other, mainly connected to selection and this idea that I'm not going to get selected unless I look absolutely perfect in every scenario. The unfortunate outpouring of that was a sort of bloodbath massacre afterwards when we lost in the group stages. I say we here as England, obviously, and the communication that flowed out of that between the players was crappy. A lot of shouting, screaming, emotions. Anyway, long story short, Eddie Jones came in and the team started to get on a run of good results. They had about 18 wins, so that was equaling the world record of back-to-back wins over a 2-year period. And then on the 19th game, they lost to Ireland. And what was interesting was it descended back to that 2015 state. It was almost as if that was the first piece of trauma they'd experienced since 2015, and it triggered all the same behaviours from 2015 of shouting and screaming at each other. And it was that point that we sort of looked at that vulnerability, but also putting a framework around how are we going to communicate when we feel crap. Outpourings of grief in and of itself can become a bit of a quagmire where we all feel vulnerable, we all have crappy days, and we can suddenly bring ourselves down. So we spent quite a bit of time trying to work on how do we communicate when A, we're under pressure, and B, when we want to say things aren't going well, we're not happy with this. And it's especially important in team environments because it's really easy for one person to derail the whole conversation by being aggressive, and all of that vulnerability suddenly gets lost. All the value of sharing gets lost because you're suddenly on the defensive again.
Yeah, there's a few points that have come out of just the last sort of few minutes about the ways to deal with resilience, which aren't having to go through a catastrophic situation, which is setting up an environment for yourself, understanding yourself, being able to take a step back, be reflective, but also in a team situation, having a team, of course, can either have a positive or negative effect, but there's a whole separate conversation about how you set up teams to be safe and feel welcome, feel wanted. But I think there's an important element, which is just having a team around you, having a crew around you that you can talk openly to, you can trust, you can share your concerns, you can share your worries, you can share some negative things that happen in order to set you up to be resilient in those situations that you need to be. Wow, what a ride it was exploring these amazing discussions. I wish I had so much more time to cover all the previous episodes that contributed to this topic of creating a better, more purpose-led and resilient future. I hope you enjoyed this edition of the Hub and Spoken special series. I want to thank all our guests in the episodes curated on this edition and all other editions for their contribution to making this podcast so valuable and sharing their stories. I also want to thank our wonderful listeners across 126 countries and counting for listening, feeding back, and sharing these episodes with other people to enjoy. We hope you find this series interesting, inspiring, and informative, so please do check out the rest of the series.